Here's a seemingly simple question with an obvious answer. How do you know when a biblical passage begins and ends? Most of the time it's pretty obvious. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it doesn't always work that way. So a couple of weeks ago I talked about the process of exegesis, the process of interpreting Scripture. I ended with a very cursory description of the process, but it was by no means complete. Today I want to talk about one of the tools in the exegetical toolbox, actually really two tools that go together. And together they are the very first step in interpreting a passage, determining the limits of the passage, or what scholars call a pericope. Often a pericope is marked by what you might think of as literary brackets called an inclusio that mark the beginning and end of the unit. Let me explain. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. You know you're reading a fairy tale when a story begins once upon a time and ends, and they lived happily ever after. The fairy tale itself is the pericope. The beginning and ending phrases once upon a time and happily ever after are the inclusio. In the Bible, though, it's not always that cut and dried. Even passages that seem like a complete unit can be part of an even larger unit. Let me illustrate with some different examples and show how our determination of a pericope can affect our interpretation of the text. So the easiest example of a pericope might be one of the parables of Jesus. Some of his parables are very, very short. Here's one from Matthew 13. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then, in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. This one verse can be a complete thought, a complete discrete passage. Simple, done. It can be read as its own pericope. But it also is part of a larger section in which Jesus gives a number of parables about the kingdom. The message of the whole group is pretty complex. You can read a brief collection of them in Matthew chapter 13. Almost the entire chapter is filled with these parables. Some are brief, others much longer, but taken together, they comprise a pericope, enclosed within an inclusio. It begins with Jesus sitting down to teach and ends with Jesus getting up and leaving that place. Jesus sitting and then getting up and leaving form the inclusio. So far, so good. This tells us that one unit of Scripture, one pericope, can include several smaller discrete units. Knowing this can help interpret both the individual units and the entire larger unit. Now, there are also different literary tricks biblical writers might use to include more than one story in a pericope. One of the most well-known of these is the way the writer of the Gospel of Mark will begin one story, insert a different story into the middle of it, and then return to the original story. The most famous example, perhaps, is a pair of stories in Mark 5. The passage is a bit lengthy for me to read in total, so let me just summarize. Jesus has just cast out a demon from a man on one side of the Sea of Galilee. He gets in a boat with his disciples and goes to the other side. When he gets out of the boat, a man named Jairus, a leader of one of the synagogues, approaches him to ask him to come heal his daughter who is near death. Jesus starts off to go to the man's house, when all of a sudden we get the story of a woman in the crowd who has a hemorrhage, who approaches him and touches his garment. She's immediately healed, but Jesus becomes aware that power has gone out from him, and he asks, "Who's touched him?" She admits to it, fearing that he might be angry, but he declares, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Then immediately after that, someone from the town where he's heading comes to tell Jairus that his daughter has now already died and that he shouldn't bother Jesus any further. Jesus responds, "Do not fear, only believe." And then he goes to the house and raises her from the dead. After this, he leaves and heads to his own hometown. Look, each story could stand alone, but Mark clearly intends for them to be read together so that each one helps interpret the other. And he has skillfully done this not only by inserting one story into the middle of the other, but he's also used an inclusio to define the pericope. The inclusio is formed by Jesus crossing the sea and getting out of the boat at the beginning, and then leaving to go home at the end. A pericope with two stories contained within an inclusio. Now here's where things get really interesting. There's some examples of inclusios that expand several units or pericopes and even different books of the Bible, including both the Old and the New Testament. There are several of these, but perhaps the most breathtaking of all is this. Let me just read two brief passages, one from Genesis and one from Revelation. Genesis 1 begins, and I'm reading from the Old Revised Standard Version here, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Then in Revelation 21, the next to last chapter in the Bible, we read, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." Taken together, these two passages help us understand the entire Bible. We understand it at one level to form a complete unit of meaning, with an inclusio being marked by the creation of heaven and earth and the creation of the new heaven and earth. As great as both passages are, identifying heaven and earth as markers of an inclusio helps us understand even better what God is up to. I hope this description of these important exegetical tools helps enhance your understanding and appreciation of the Bible. Sometimes they help open up a wealth of knowledge that only serve to deepen our faith. Tomorrow, biblical inerrancy and biblical infallibility. What are they? And are they the same thing? But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.